Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Batra Daf Nun Dalid. We're going to start at the bottom of Nun Gimel Amud Bet. Shavua Tov to everyone. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah Bira'ah. What we're continuing is types of creating a chazakah on land. This is not a chazakah of 3 years. That's something different. That's how I prove I was the owner after I claim I bought something. This is different. This is I buy something, and in order to acquire it, I have to do a certain act. Either I get a shtar, a document, or money, or what we already said, if it's a place where normally you get a document, it's not enough to give money, or I can do some action that improves the land. So now we're going to get into what is considered improving the land and what is not. Specifically, we talked about achilat perot, that I've been eating, benefiting from the produce of the field, which works to prove if you didn't protest that I'm the owner after I've been doing this for 3 years. That doesn't work in this case because eating fruits of a field is not a way of saying I'm the owner. It's by improving the field. Eating the fruits is just taking things from the field. It's not actually improving. And particularly, we're talking here about hefker. Okay, so it's possibly some of these cases might be a little different if I actually bought it from you and then you agreed to give it to me and then I did an act showing ownership. But if it's from hefker, something ownerless, it's actually a little more difficult to prove that I'm the actual owner. First of all, eating produce for sure won't work because if the field is hefker, so are the fruits. So just because I took some fruits doesn't mean I took ownership of the land. It just could mean I took ownership of the fruits, of the produce. So anyway, we're going to see some of the differences here, but specifically most of these cases are really talking about ownerless property. That's our topic for today. Again, what I mean here is that there's different opinions among the commentaries about would this also be relevant in a sale or would it not? Okay, that's the real issue here. And a sale, again, I mean acquiring the property when we agree on a sale, meaning it's too late to renege after I've done that, not 3 years. That's something entirely different because there I'm just proving that since you didn't protest and I've been here for 3 years, right, and I claim I bought it, that's a different story. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah Bira'ah Amar Rav Yehuda. If I just stick either turnips or, the Rashbam says there's machloket, whether it's actual turnips or I put turnip seeds into the ground, into holes in the ground of a ger, meaning of a convert who died and didn't have any heirs and now it's ownerless, lo have chazakah. This is not a chazakah. The Rashbam claims, and there's different opinions about what the issue is here, the Rashbam claims the problem is I didn't cover it, and therefore I didn't really do anything to improve the land because I just threw a few seeds in. My time, huh? What's the reason? The Gemara says, when I threw it in there, that wasn't actually improving the land. If in the end the turnips grew, that just luck, I was lucky and it happened. It's not really because of what I did. Okay, it is, but it's somewhat indirect because I didn't really do it properly and I didn't really improve the land. Amar Shmuel. Shmuel is there going to give a whole list of cases. And if it's done this way, it's a kinyan. If it's done that way, it's not. And how do we know? And then it's going to be the same structure. Haima de pashach dikla, if you trim a palm tree, adata de dikla kane, if you do it to improve the tree, like pruning, then you're acquiring it. Adata de chevata, if you're doing it to give branches to your animals to eat, lo kane. That's not a kinyan, because that's more like eating produce. That's not improving the tree at all. Hechidami, how do we know? Shaka mahagis, so mahagis, if you take from all different directions and you prune it from all over, adata didikla, you're obviously doing it to improve the tree. Kula mehagis, if you do it all on one side, adata chevata, then you're obviously doing it just because you want the branches for your animals. We're going to come back to this case soon. We're going to have a very interesting case with a woman. So hold off. Remember this case. V'amar Shmuel, another ruling. If you're cleaning out the property by taking away twigs, adata de arkane, adata de sibe lokane. So if you're collecting twigs, if you're doing it to improve the land, like to clean it, then you're konen, you acquire it. But if you do it just because you want twigs, you don't acquire it. Same concept. Hechidami, how do we know? Well, shaka ravrave bizutre. If you pick up big pieces and little twigs, also clearly you're doing it adata de ar to clean up the land. Shaka ravrave b'shavak zute. But if you take the big ones and you leave the zutre, the little ones, adata ditzive. Obviously, you just want the twigs and you're only taking the better ones, and then it's not to improve the land, and then you don't acquire it. V'amar Shmuel, hama de itkal tikla, adata de arkane, adata de bedari lokane. If you're flattening out your land, if you're doing it for the land, you acquire it. If you're doing it to make a threshing floor, you don't acquire it. Some people say because you're doing it to make a threshing floor temporarily. which would mean if you did a permanent one, maybe that would be considered improvement of the land. Some people think even that's not improvement of the land, even if it's permanent, right? And what we mean is by flattening out the ground, that's when you're doing it for the reasons to improve the land. So now we're going to say, Hechidami, how do we know? Shakil mulya, just one second. Right. Shakil mulya, v'shada benatza, if you take dirt from the mound and you put it in the hole, then obviously you're flattening out the ground and you're trying to make better land. You're making it all flat so you can plant. So that would work. But shada, but adata da'ara, then it's for the land. Mulya b'mulya, if you take a mound and move it to another mound, or natza b'natza, or if you fill up a hole by, and then right, this would be right. I think the point is you're taking the dirt from one place and you're moving it maybe into another hole, but you're digging up one hole while filling in another, but you're not flattening out the land. Meaning all the issues is you're working mound with a mound and you're working hole with a hole, then then you're just trying to make, right? You're taking from one hole, moving it to another hole so you can flatten out that hole, but the other hole is becoming deeper. That's not improving the land. That's just finding one, you're making one area where you're turning that into a threshing floor. If you open like a hole to allow water from a stream to go into your property, if you're doing it to benefit your land, you're kone. If you're doing it to get fish, okay, how would you be doing it to get fish? We'll see in a minute. Then you don't acquire it because again, you're just trying to get something, but you're not actually improving the land. If you make one hole on one side of the field, the other on the other, and the water's going to stream right through, and the water's going to go out, but the fish are going to fall into your property, then you're obviously doing it for the fish. If it's just one hole where you're allowing the water to come in, obviously you're doing it to improve your land. She was cutting a palm tree for 13 years, and taking the branches, right? For 13 years she did this on a tree that again was ownerless. She assumed she was the owner. One day, okay, after 13 years, Atahu Gavra, a person walks over, okay, it's missing a word here, Gavra. Atahu Gavra, Rafik Chute Porta, plows around the tree a little bit, and then claims I'm the owner. Ata the Kamei de Levi, so they go before Levi, but Amrila Kamei de Marukva, some people say Marukva, Ukme biyade, and comes whoever it was, whichever rabbi it was, the paskin, and said, the man has the rights to the tree. The woman's not the owner of the tree. What's her reaction? She starts screaming. She's so frustrated. She says, what do you mean? For 13 years, I've been using this tree, and now you come and you take it away? This story, by the way, after the first time I learned this story, I never forgot it, okay? I don't remember everything I learned. This story was one of those I never forgot. And in fact, there's a slew of these kinds of stories of the screaming woman. Remember with the sukkah, where they steal her sukkah. It's a very famous series of women. We'll talk in another minute about the woman in Gittin. And basically he says to her, what am I supposed to do? You didn't do your chazaka right. You always trim the branches on one side of it. That doesn't improve the land. You didn't do it in the right way, and I can't help you. My hands are tied, basically. Because halachically, okay, now this goes back to a lot of things we learned, especially in Bava Metzia, and also here about, Basita Yashar V'Atov. There's the right thing to do, and there's not the right thing to do. Okay, we're going to see that also later in a later sugya today. But here we have this horrible situation where the women just didn't know halacha. And, one of the messages of this story, I think, really is women should be learning because they need to know how to protect themselves from all sorts of everyday occurrences. Had she known, she would have just made sure to do it properly and have a chazaka. And instead, this one guy walks in, does one little act, and with that, he becomes the owner of this tree that she's been using for 13 years. Okay? So it shows how much knowledge is important and understanding. And it shows how women often felt, right, we see from these stories, helpless in the court because they didn't know the halacha and they got themselves stuck. Okay, you might remember there's the story in Gittin of the woman who goes to the rabbi to get her ketubah money, and the rabbi says, "Look, Rav didn't allow people to collect their ketubahs." So then she says, "Okay, well, at least give me mizonot." And then he says, "Well, you brought hatovat. I'm going to pass them like Shmuel, who says if you collect your ketubah in court, then you don't get mizonot already. You know, once you start, you make a claim, I want my ketubah, you can no longer get mizonot." And then the woman is left without a ketubah, without mizonot, and she's very upset. And what she does in this case is she doesn't scream, she curses the rabbi. And in fact, the curse comes true. And she says to him, because your pot's going to be like Rav and like Shmuel, like be consistent, either go with Rav and then at least give me mizonot, or go like Shmuel and give me my ketubah. But you're being unfair to me. And there he actually dies from her curse. So, you know, and then there's the woman in Sukkah, they steal her Sukkah, and then, you know, she just gets back the money for the beam, right? She says, the rabbis are sitting in my Sukkah that they stole my beam. And then they say, well, all you get back is the money for your beam. We can't give you your beam back. So there's all these situations where the women didn't really understand the halacha properly and then got into these situations that perhaps they could have avoided had they known the halacha properly. So again, you know, I take this as women need to learn halacha so that they know what to do, and so that knowledge is you know, helps you to get by in life. And interesting that the rabbis allowed the bottom line halacha and didn't really, you know, perhaps they should have taken into consideration, and maybe it's a critique on them, but they didn't take into consideration always the whole picture and what you're doing to this woman, and you're leaving her without money, without, right, in the ketubah case, without money, without food, right? Or here you're leaving this woman without her tree that she was eating from for so many years. Amarav, Hatzal Tzua b'nechsei hager kana, d'Rav lo kana leginta d'bei Rav ela b'tzurta. So Rav says that if you you etch something into the wall of a house of a ger who died and left, right, ownerless property, you acquire it. And how do they know this? Not because Rav said it, but to Rav lo kane leginti d'bei Rav ela b'tzurta. That's how they say historically. That's how Rav ended up with this gina that was next to his Beit Midrash. That gina he acquired by drawing this picture on the wall, and that was his way of acquiring it. And that proves that this is the way to acquire things. Itmar. Now we're going to have a machlok at Rav and Shmuel. So you have a field that's demarcated boundaries. Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav. As soon as you just bang the land with a hoe one time, you already acquire the entire field because it's a demarcated border. Again, this is ownerless property. Most people think this wouldn't be true if you bought a property. As soon as you do one little act, that acquires everything. But here, there's no boundaries. Now, this is different from Gadar Na'al. Now, you might say those things are one little action, but that's an action that affects the entire field. This just affects, right, one little space. It doesn't affect the whole field. Whether you hoe one little area has no effects on anything else. If you close, right, put a door up, that already closes the entire field. Shmuel says, what are you talking about? This is an ownerless field. You can't acquire the entire thing just by doing one little act. No, you acquire that little space, not more than that. Turning now to Amabed, what if it doesn't have a particularly demarcated boundary? Then what? Ad kama. What do you have to do in order to acquire the whole thing? The Rashbam says we're talking about according to Rav. When it's according to Shmuel, right? It would be the same. You would have to do, you know, something more significant, although I guess you could say it's according to Shmuel also, but Rav is saying that if you have boundaries, one little thing acquires the whole thing. What if it doesn't have boundaries? How do you acquire the whole field? You do a row with an ox and come back. So the Rashbam explains that what it means is if you plowed one whole row to the end and then came back with your ox on the second row, then you would basically acquire that whole, let's say you did that to the length of the field, that whole length, and then till the end of the field, even though it doesn't have a demarcated boundary, whatever's considered that field, you would have acquired it by doing those two rows. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Now we're going to get into a whole weird situation. The rules for acquiring land is different for Gentiles than it is for Jews. With Gentiles, money acquires. Money is the thing that acquires and basically passes on ownership, money. But what if you have, with Jews, we said money only works if there's no shtar generally written in that place. But if that place you always write a document, then money is not going to work. So now we have a case where a Gentile sold to a Jew. So once the Gentiles sold to a Jew, they're like a midbar. It's like a desert. A desert is ownerless. So if a Gentile sold me property, I paid money. I don't have a shtar yet. So I didn't acquire it because I don't have a shtar. But the Gentile gave up her rights to it already because she got the money. So she's done with this property. And that's what we're going to say right now. Well, she already gave up her rights. And I, though, only acquire it once I get a shtar. So now going back to the line I didn't explain, therefore, so if I bought this land from a Gentile and you come along and you do an act of plowing in the land becomes yours. It's a crazy situation. Again, getting back to what's morally or ethically right. This is certainly not morally or ethically right? And that's what they say here, right? So if you do an act, you acquire them. Now, the commentary is all up in arms about this. Some people say, yeah, technically you acquire it, but you're a rasha, you're a bad person because you took my land knowing that I was going to acquire it. Some people say, right, there's a Gemara in Kiddushin that says if you're about to take something from Hefker that you take something from Hefker that a poor person was about to take, also you're considered a bad person. And they say this is no different than that. Some people don't think that you're a bad person. Some people think it's fine. Some people think you actually have to pay them the money for the property, which makes sense. In other words, you acquired it and I don't get to have the land anymore, but you do need to compensate me, obviously, for all the money I spent on it and the fact that you don't get the land for free. So there's a lot more to the sugya than what's said here in the Gemara, and like I said, differences of opinion. It comes from Rav Yosef. It says, wait a minute. Did Shmuel really say this? Shmuel is the famous one who said, the law of the land is the law. We have to keep the law of whatever the land is. And Malka and the king said, Lo likne ara ela bi'igarta. And the king himself rules that you don't acquire land unless you have it with a shtar. So even though Jewish law says that a Gentile acquires land with money, and therefore the Gentile would have made this ownerless, but the law of the land is you need a document. And it's not going to be, right, if you don't have a document, okay, it's not just Jewish law between Jews, it's also the law of the land for the Gentiles. So basically, how could you say that by Jewish law this is ownerless when Jewish law says the law of the land is the law, and the king says it needs a shtar, which means that a Gentile had to give up their rights to the property until I get a document, which means that you can't go and acquire it. By the way, there's a whole debate about dina de malchuta dina, whether it's only things that directly affect the king, like taxes, okay, and things like that, or maybe any kind of law of the land is the law. That's a fascinating machloket in and of itself. So Amar Le, Rav Yosef answers him, Ana lo yadana. I don't know exactly the answer to your question, but I do know that Uvada Habe Bedura de Ravata, in Dura, this place where there were a lot of shepherds, Be Yisrael de Zavin Arameh Be'Kol Habim. So a Jew bought land from a Gentile, Va'ati Yisrael Acharina Rafik Be'Porta, and a different Jew came and plowed a little bit. Ata l'kamed Rav Yehuda, the case was brought in front of Rav Yehuda, Ukma biyadei d'sheni. And he said it goes into the property of the second one. So it looks like they do this. And, I don't know what to tell you about Shmuel, but Rav Yehuda did this also, so it must prove that Shmuel's right. I can't answer your question about Din de Malchuta Dina, but it looks like this is what we hold. To which Amar Le, Abaye said, Juradara, Vata Kamarata, what, you're bringing proof from that place? Hatam Bage Mitam Ruhavi. That land there was land that the king didn't know about. It was hidden property. Okay, there's this thing as hidden property, but it wasn't in the registry. Okay, the king didn't know about it, and therefore they hadn't paid any taxes. They weren't giving taxes to the authorities at all, the Gentiles. So that means that as far as the king was concerned, he wasn't really a landowner because Malka Amar Mandiav Taska Lechol Ara, the one who pays taxes, that's the one who owns the property. And it doesn't matter if you bought the property, it just matters whoever pays the taxes. So in this case, the Gentile didn't actually own the land, and that's why it was ownerless. And therefore, the person who came and did some plowing and then paid the tax, they became the landowner fair and square. That has nothing to do with our topic of Gentiles passing over territory. So basically, Abaye knocks out Rav Yosef's proof for how he proved that Shmuel really meant what he said, even though Dina de Malchuta Dina. So we don't really have an answer. Now we're going to see another case, and we won't finish it today, but we'll get started. Rav Huna Zavin Arameh Avei Kochavim, again, same case. He bought land from a Gentile. Ati Yisrael Acher Rafik Baporta, and someone else came along and plowed it before Rav Huna got to do that. Here, you can't say he didn't know the halacha, like the woman, right? Until the Kamei de Rav Nachman ukma biyade. So it comes before Rav Nachman, and Rav Nachman says, "Oh, it's yours." In the meaning, sorry, the other person comes for Rav Nachman. They came with Rav Huna, and Rav Nachman says, "Oh yeah, it belongs to the second person who did a kinyan, not you, Rav Huna, who paid the money for it." Amar lei, my datech, Amar Shmuel, nichsei oved kochavim arein kamidbarn. Here comes Rav Huna with his knowledge again, comparing to the previous case where she didn't have knowledge. So, Amar le my datech, what? Amar Shmuel, nichsei oved kochavim arein kamidbar b'chol machzik behem zacha? Is it because you hold like Shmuel, who says that Gentile property is like a desert, and anyone who, right, desert ownerless, anyone who comes can acquire them? Well, I'm just going to go a little more into tomorrow's daf. Well, then you should, if you're going to hold like Shmuel there, you should hold like the other thing of Shmuel, who said earlier in today's daf, the review, Amar Shmuel, lo kana la makom kosho bilvad. But Shmuel says if you come and do an act of harisha in a sedeh hefker, you only acquire what that little space is. So if you're going to give that other person the space, at least give them just that little area, not the whole field. So we're going to have to see what Rav Nachman responds to Rav Huna, why he doesn't accept his argument. Okay, so what we saw today is all different kinds of situations where people do an act. Is it considered an act that acquires the land, or is it not? Kinyan chazaka on land, what has to be done? Basically, the criteria is it has to improve the land. If it doesn't improve the land, you're just benefiting from it, but you're not doing anything to the land. That doesn't work. From that, we got to the story about the woman who was very frustrated because she couldn't. We talked about Rav, who drew a picture on a wall, and that was enough to acquire it because that improved the house. We then talked about the boundary. If there's a boundary around the field, the machloka Rav and Shmuel is one little area enough to acquire the whole thing, or do you have to actually work in the whole field, or more, show more ownership, like 2 rows? What do we do if it's not Nesuyemit, it doesn't have boundaries? Then you definitely have to do the 2 rows. Then we saw this weird case, which we finished up with about the nichse, or we're in the middle of, about the nichse oved kochavim, how since the oved kochavim acquires things with money and therefore gave up rights to their property once they got the money, but the Jew didn't acquire it till there's a shtar. If there was just money that transferred hands and no document yet, the Jew doesn't acquire it. If somebody comes and does a chazaka, they can acquire it. Again, we discuss whether it's the right or wrong thing to do, and whether they have to pay the money or not. With that, we finish today's daf. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Tov and a good day.